She thought she was saving a frozen, dying dog from the most brutal winter on Earth. She was wrong. What 72-year-old Hannah thawed out in her kitchen wasn't a pet, it was an apex predator. But when the killer woke up, it didn't attack her. It did something that would shock the entire world. The locals call it the White Silence. In Oymyakon, a remote village in the Yakutia region of Siberia, the cold isn't just weather. It is a living, breathing entity that hunts you. When the temperature drops below -60°C, birds freeze in midair and fall like stones. Your breath turns to ice crystals instantly, creating a phenomenon the Yakuts call the whispering of stars. For 72-year-old Hannah Jansen, the cold was the only companion she had left. Hannah lived at the edge of the village, in a timber cabin that had settled crookedly into the permafrost over the last 50 years. Since her husband, Carl, had passed away 3 years prior, the village had slowly drifted away from her. She was the outsider, a woman of German descent who had married a local and stayed long after he was gone. She was stubborn, terrified of nursing homes, and determined to die in the house where she had raised her children. It was January 14th, a Tuesday that the meteorological station would later record as one of the coldest nights of the decade. The thermometer outside Hannah's kitchen window read -62 degrees Celsius, -79.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was howling, a banshee scream that rattled the thick, triple-paned glass. Hannah was preparing her evening tea, her hands trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the arthritis that chewed at her knuckles. Her stockpile by the stove was low, and if the fire went out during the night, she wouldn't wake up in the morning. She wrapped herself in layers: a woolen undershirt, a thick sweater, Carl's old reindeer hide coat, a scarf that covered everything but her eyes, and heavy felt boots known as valenki. Stepping out onto the porch was like stepping into outer space. The air was so dry and cold it burned her lungs. The world was pitch black, save for the weak yellow beam of her flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. She moved quickly toward the woodpile, her breath hissing in the silence. She grabbed 3 logs, her muscles screaming against the weight. As she turned back toward the safety of the cabin, her boot caught on something rigid. Hannah stumbled, dropping a log. She cursed under her breath, shining the light down to see what had tripped her. It looked like a discarded sack of potatoes, buried half deep in a snowdrift against the side of her shed. But sacks didn't have fur. Hannah squinted, leaning closer, the wind whipping her scarf across her face. A dog, perhaps? A stray husky that had lost its way and curled up to die? In Yakutia, stray dogs didn't last an hour in this weather. This creature was stiff, coated in a layer of frost, so thick it looked like a statue carved from ice. She poked it with her boot. Solid. "Poor thing," she whispered, the words snatched away by the wind. She bent down to retrieve her log, intending to go inside. It was dead. But as her glove brushed against the creature's flank, she felt it. A tremor. It was microscopic, a ghost of a movement, but it was there. A muscle spasm. Hannah froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Logic told her to leave it. But Hannah looked at the expanse of white emptiness around her. She knew what it was like to be cold. She knew what it was like to be forgotten. "You stupid old woman," she grumbled. She dropped the other logs. She bent down, hooking her arms under the animal's belly. She groaned, the strain tearing at her back, but adrenaline flooded her system. She dragged the frozen lump through the snow, up the 3 wooden steps of the porch, and kicked the door open. She collapsed onto the kitchen floor, the creature sliding in beside her. She kicked the door shut, sealing out the white silence. The kitchen was warm, smelling of dried herbs and wood smoke. Hannah lay on the floor for a moment, gasping for air, clutching her chest. When her breathing slowed, she looked at what she had saved. It was a matted ball of grey and white fur, stiff legs sticking out at awkward angles. Its eyes were sealed shut with ice. Hannah dragged it near the cast-iron stove, not too close, or the shock of the heat would kill it, but close enough to let the warmth bleed into the air. She grabbed old towels and a blanket. She began to rub the animal, trying to stimulate circulation, breaking the ice from its coat. As the frost melted, a puddle of dirty water formed on her pristine floor. Hannah didn't care. She worked with a manic focus. She heated water. She massaged the stiff limbs. An hour passed. Then, too, the creature let out a low, gurgling sound. A wheeze. "Come on," Hannah whispered, her hands aching. Don't you die on me now. She went to the sink to wet a cloth. When she turned back, the creature had moved. It had uncurled slightly, and that was when Hannah dropped the cloth. Now that the ice was gone and the fur was fluffing up in the warmth, she saw the markings. These weren't the chaotic patches of a stray mongrel. They were rosettes, dark, irregular rings on a coat of smoky grey. The paws were enormous, massive, snowshoe-like pads that were far too big for a dog of this size. The tail was thick and long, almost as long as the body itself. Hannah's blood ran cold, colder than the air outside. She had lived in Yakutia long enough to know the legends. She knew what the hunters whispered about in the taverns. The ghost of the mountains. This wasn't a dog. It wasn't even a wolf. Lying on her kitchen rug, slowly waking up, was a snow leopard, one of the rarest, most elusive predators on the planet. And it was in her house. Hannah backed away slowly, her back hitting the kitchen counter. Her hand instinctively reached for the heavy iron skillet hanging on the rack. Snow leopards were not supposed to be here. They belonged in the high Altai Mountains or the Sayans, thousands of kilometers to the south. But nature was changing. The winters were getting stranger, prey was migrating, and animals were turning up in places they shouldn't be. The leopard shifted. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like a chainsaw idling in the distance. The animal lifted its head. It was young, not a full-grown adult, but a sub-adult, perhaps a year or two old. Still, it was big enough to kill her. Its eyes opened. They were pale, piercing green, clouded with confusion and pain. Hannah stood paralyzed. If she ran for the door, she'd freeze to death outside. If she stayed, she might be mauled. The leopard tried to stand. Its front legs scrabbled on the linoleum, claws clicking like knives. It collapsed back down, panting heavily. Hannah's fear began to recede, replaced by that stubborn pragmatism that had kept her alive in the north for so long. He can't even stand, she thought. He's a child. A lost, dying child. She lowered the skillet. You're in a bad way, aren't you? She said, her voice steady. The leopard's ears twitched at the sound. It watched her, unblinking. Hannah moved to the fridge. She took out a chunk of raw reindeer meat she had been saving for a stew. She cut a small strip and tossed it toward the rug. The meat landed a foot from the leopard's nose. The great cat sniffed, then devoured it in a single snap of its jaws. It looked at her, waiting. That's all for now, Hannah said firmly. Too much, and you'll get sick. She spent the night sitting in her rocking chair, the skillet in her lap, watching the predator sleep. She named him Baron, after her father's old hunting dog. By the morning of the third day, the storm had broken. The silence outside was absolute, the sky a piercing, bruised purple. Inside, the dynamic had shifted. Baron was regaining his strength. He could stand now. He paced the small kitchen, his tail twitching, his massive paws making soft thuds on the floor. He watched Hannah constantly. He didn't growl anymore. When she cooked, he sat by the stove, his green eyes following her every move. He was intelligent, unnervingly so. He seemed to understand that this small, fragile human was the source of warmth and food. But Hannah knew she had a problem. A massive problem. In Oymyakon, predators were not tolerated. The locals relied on reindeer herds for their livelihood. Wolves and bears were shot on sight. If anyone knew she was harboring a snow leopard, a creature that could decimate a herd in a night, they wouldn't just kill the cat. They might burn her house down. Specifically, she was worried about Victor. Victor was her nearest neighbor, living about 2 miles down the valley. He was a man made of rough edges, a former poacher who now worked as a security contractor for the local mines. He had eyes like a hawk and a temper to match. He drove a modified snowmobile that sounded like a jet engine, and he visited Hannah once a week to deliver her groceries, a service she paid him handsomely for. It was Friday. Victor was coming. At 10 a.m., Hannah heard the distinctive whine of the snowmobile cutting through the valley air. "Baron," she hissed. The leopard was lying on the rug, licking a paw. She needed to hide him. But where? The cabin was tiny. The bedroom? If Victor came in for tea, he'd smell the musk. The leopard had a distinct, wild scent like pine needles and raw meat. "Cellar," she whispered. She opened the trapdoor in the kitchen floor that led to the root cellar. It was cool down there, but not freezing. Baron looked at the hole, then at her. "Go!" she snapped, nudging him with her foot. The leopard let out a huff of annoyance, but surprisingly obeyed. He slipped silently into the darkness of the cellar. Hannah slammed the trapdoor shut and threw the heavy woven rug over it just as the roar of the engine died outside her front door. She smoothed her hair, checked her reflection in the kettle, and opened the door. Victor stood there, a giant of a man in a parka that made him look twice as wide. He was holding a box of groceries. His face was red from the wind, his eyes scanning the room as he stepped in. "Hannah," he grunted, kicking the snow off his boots. "Tea, Victor?" Hannah asked, forcing a smile. Victor dropped the box on the table. He didn't answer immediately. He stood in the center of the kitchen, sniffing the air. "You change your cleaning spray?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "No," Hannah said, turning to the stove to hide her trembling hands. "Smells. Strong. Like a zoo," Hannah laughed, a brittle, cracking sound. "I haven't taken the trash out in 3 days because of the storm. The meat scraps are turning." Victor walked around the kitchen. He was looking at the floor, specifically at the scratches on the linoleum where Baron had scrabbled to stand up. "You get a dog, Hannah?" Victor asked, pointing a gloved finger at the marks. "No," she said quickly. I dragged a log in. It had a nail in it. Scratched the floor." Victor looked at her. He didn't believe her. He was a hunter. He knew the difference between a nail scratch and a claw mark. "You know," Victor said, his voice dropping an octave, "a wolf pack took down 3 of my reindeer last night. Just a few miles from here. Torn to pieces." He took another step. He was standing directly on the edge of the rug. Below the floorboards, in the dark, Baron let out a low, menacing growl. It was soft, but in the silence of the cabin, it was audible. Victor froze. His hand moved to the knife on his belt. "What was that?" he whispered. Hannah's mind raced. She needed a lie, a perfect lie. Or Baron was dead. And maybe she was too. "It's the pipes," she blurted out. "The frost. The ground shifted during the storm. The pipes have been groaning all morning." Victor stared at her for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Finally, he relaxed his grip on the knife. "Pipes," he repeated flatly. "Yes. Old house, Victor. Everything groans." He nodded slowly. "Right. Well, I'll leave your groceries." He turned to the door, but stopped with his hand on the latch. "Keep your door locked, Hannah. If there's a wolf big enough to make scratches like that, a locked door might not stop it." He left. Hannah watched through the window until his snowmobile disappeared over the ridge. She slumped against the door, sliding down until she hit the floor. Baron leaped out, his ears flattened, agitated. He paced the room, sniffing where Victor had stood. Hannah realized then that her life had changed irrevocably. She had saved the leopard, but now the leopard was a secret she had to keep. And Victor suspicious. Greedy Victor was not going to let it go. He smelled money. A snow leopard pelt was worth a fortune on the black market. She looked at Baron, who was now nudging her hand with his wet nose. "We have to get you out of here," she whispered. But not yet. She didn't know it then, but the storm hadn't just brought a leopard to her door. It had set in motion a chain of events that would endanger everything she loved and lead to a miracle she never could have imagined. The days bled into weeks. February arrived, bringing with it a deceptive calm. The temperature hovered around -40 balmy by Oymyakon standards. Inside the cabin, a bizarre domesticity had taken hold. Baron was no longer a patient. He was a roommate. A roommate who could crush a human skull with his jaws. Yes, but a roommate nonetheless. He had filled out. His coat was glossy, the grey rosettes stark against the white underbelly. He spent his days sleeping on the rug by the fire or watching the birds through the window, chattering at them with that strange, chirping sound snow leopards make. Hannah had depleted her savings buying meat from the village butcher, claiming she was making large batches of stew for the local dog sled teams. It was a flimsy lie, but it held for now. But the real threat wasn't the butcher. He had returned twice, once to check the pipes, and another time just to say hello. He never came inside again, but Hannah saw him circling the property on his snowmobile, looking for tracks. She had been meticulous, burying Baron's waist deep in the snow, far from the house, and brushing away any prints he made during his brief, supervised outings in the backyard. But one afternoon, while Hannah was napping, disaster struck. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright. The kitchen window, the one facing the backwoods, was shattered. Shards of glass littered the floor. "Baron!" she screamed. The cabin was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. He had jumped. He had seen something, a hare, a fox, and the instinct had taken over. He had crashed through the double-pane glass and was gone. Hannah didn't grab her coat. She grabbed her rifle, an old bolt-action hunting rifle that had belonged to Carl. She jammed her feet into her boots and ran out the back door. The tracks were fresh in the snow. Huge, deep prints, leading straight toward the tree line. Victor had been watching. She heard the shot crack through the air a second later. Crack! It echoed off the valley walls. A sickening, final sound. "No!" Hannah screamed, her voice tearing. She ran. She ran faster than she had in 20 years, her lungs burning, her legs pumping through the knee-deep snow. She crested the small hill that led into the forest. There, in a clearing about 100 yards away, was Victor. He was standing next to his snowmobile, his rifle raised, and lying in the snow, a patch of grey, against the white, was Baron. He wasn't moving. Hannah felt a rage she had never known. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal, maternal fury. She raised her rifle. She didn't aim at Victor. She wasn't a killer, but she fired a warning shot into the tree trunk a foot above his head. Boom! Victor flinched, spinning around. He saw Hannah charging down the hill, screaming like a banshee, working the bolt of her rifle. "You touch him again, and I swear to God, Victor," she roared. Victor lowered his gun, a smirk playing on his lips. "Crazy old witch," he shouted back. "I just saved you. That beast was stalking you. He lives with me!" Hannah screamed, reaching the clearing. She dropped to her knees beside Baron. There was blood on the snow. A lot of it. But it wasn't coming from Baron's chest or head. It was his leg. Victor's bullet had grazed his rear flank, a deep flesh wound, but not fatal. Baron was snarling, trying to rise, but the shock and pain kept him pinned. His green eyes were wide, dilated with fear. "He's a menace," Victor spat, walking closer. "Do you know what that skin is worth? Enough to get me out of this frozen hellhole. Step aside." "Hannah," he raised his rifle again. Hannah stood up. She planted her feet between the barrel of Victor's gun and the wounded leopard. She was 5'2", 72 years old, and shaking. But she didn't move. "You'll have to shoot me first," she said. Her voice was quiet now, deadly quiet. Victor laughed. "Don't be dramatic. I'm not going to shoot an old lady." Hannah stepped with him. "I'm not asking, Victor. I'm telling you. This animal saved me when I was alone. I saved him. We are family." Victor hesitated. He looked at the fierce determination in the old woman's eyes. He looked at the massive cat behind her, which was now letting out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in Victor's chest. "You're protecting a monster," Victor sneered. "One day, he'll get hungry, and he'll eat you. And when he does, don't say I didn't warn you." He spat on the ground, shouldered his rifle, and walked back to his snowmobile. He revved the engine and sped off, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the crisp air. Hannah collapsed beside Baron. "I've got you," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I've got you." Recovering from the gunshot wound took time. The trust between them deepened. Baron seemed to understand that Hannah had stood between him and death. He shadowed her everywhere. When she sat, he rested his head on her feet. When she slept, he curled up at the foot of her bed. But Hannah knew this couldn't last. Baron was healing. He was growing stronger, wilder. He spent hours pacing the cabin, staring at the mountains in the distance. Spring arrived late that year. The thaw began in May. The river ice cracked with sounds like cannon fire. It was time. Hannah packed a bag. She loaded Baron into the back of her old truck. He jumped in willingly now and drove for 4 hours. Deep into the foothills of the Chersky Range, where the human footprint was non-existent. She stopped at a ridge overlooking a vast, rocky valley. This was leopard country. She opened the truck bed. Baron hopped out. He sniffed the air, the scent of pine and melting snow filling his lungs. He looked at the vast expanse of freedom before him. Then he turned back to Hannah. He walked up to her and did something that she would remember for the rest of her life. He rubbed his head against her legs, purring a sound like a diesel engine. He licked her hand with his rough, sandpaper tongue. "Go on," she whispered, her voice choking. "Go be a king." He looked at her one last time, his green eyes holding a depth of intelligence that was almost human. Then he turned and bounded away. He didn't look back. Within seconds, he was a grey ghost, disappearing into the rocks. Hannah drove home in silence. The cabin felt empty. The silence was deafening. She was truly alone again, or so she thought. 2 years passed. Hannah was 74 now. The winters were harder on her bones. She moved slower. One evening in late November, a blizzard struck with zero warning. It was a black blizzard, the kind that buried houses and killed livestock in minutes. Hannah was in her shed, gathering wood. The wind slammed the door shut, jamming the latch. She was trapped. The temperature plummeted. The shed was uninsulated. She banged on the door, screamed for help, but the wind swallowed her voice. The cold seeped into her marrow. Her fingers went numb, then her toes. She curled into a ball in the corner, drifting into that sleepy, warm state that precedes freezing to death. "Carl," she thought. "I'm coming to see you." She closed her eyes. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside. Not the wind. Something was scratching at the door. Heavy thuds. Something powerful was throwing itself against the wood. "Victor," she wondered groggily. "Did he come back?" The wood splintered. The latch gave way with a screech of metal. The door flew open. Hannah expected to see a man. Instead, a massive, furred shape filled the doorway. It was a snow leopard. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, 2 smaller shapes tumbled into the shed. The large leopard didn't attack. It walked straight to Hannah. It lay down on top of her, its massive, warm body covering her freezing frame like a heated blanket. The thick fur was a furnace. Hannah gasped, the sudden warmth shocking her awake. She looked into those green eyes. It was him. It was Baron. He was huge now, fully grown, a magnificent king of the mountains. And he had brought his family. The mother of the cubs, a sleek, smaller female, stood guard at the door, blocking the wind. Baron licked Hannah's face, his rough tongue scraping away the frost on her cheeks. He stayed there, his heavy body pressing life back into hers, purring that deep, rumbling purr that she knew so well. They stayed like that all night, the apex predators of the Siberian wilderness, protecting the frail old woman who had once saved one of their own. When the storm broke the next morning, the village search party found them. They found the shed door broken open. They expected to find a frozen corpse. Instead, they found Hannah, alive, wrapped in old blankets, sipping tea from a thermos she had managed to open. "We saw tracks," the village elder said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Enormous tracks. Leopard tracks. They led right to this shed, and then they led back into the mountains. 3 sets." Hannah smiled, looking toward the distant peaks. "Yes," she said softly. "Old friends." The story of the woman who saved a leopard, and the leopard who returned to save her, spread far beyond Oymyakon. They said snow leopards were solitary, elusive, incapable of such loyalty, but Hannah knew the truth. Kindness is a language that every living thing understands, even the kings of the cold. This incredible story reminds us that nature never forgets a kindness. Hannah saved a life, and in return, the wild protected its own. It's a testament to the bond between humans and animals, a bond that transcends fear and survival. If a predator can show gratitude, imagine what we can do for each other. If this story warmed your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. And subscribe for more incredible true stories from the wildest corners of the earth. Thanks for watching.